My life was a masterpiece of curation. Every detail, from the sun-drenched, minimalist decor of our sprawling modern home in the hills, to the guest list for our annual summer soiree, was meticulously crafted. As a highly successful marketing executive, I understood image. My own was impeccable, sharp suits, a confident smile, a network that spanned industries and continents. But the truth, the quiet, gnawing truth I rarely admitted even to myself, was that my entire meticulously crafted public image, my vibrant social life, my very professional networking, relied heavily on Clara. Clara. My wife. She was charisma personified. Where I was analytical, she was effervescent. Where I could be reserved, she was the life of every party, effortlessly charming, remembering every name, every anecdote. She was the social architect of our lives, the magnetic force that pulled people into our orbit, cementing the connections I made in the boardroom with her effortless grace at the dinner table. She was my anchor in a world that valued superficial connections, the vibrant face of our perfectly curated existence. Without her, I sometimes feared, I was just a successful man who felt strangely adrift. The diagnosis meeting wasn't curated. It was bleak. Dr. Albright's office was stark white, the light too bright, the air too still. He spoke in calm, measured tones, but the words themselves were bludgeons. Glioblastoma. Stage 4. Aggressive. Inoperable. We're looking at 6 months to a year, Mark, he said, his voice filled with a weary empathy that only physicians delivering such news can possess. With treatment, we can extend it, manage symptoms, improve quality of life. But, it's terminal. Terminal. The word hung in the sterile air, a death knell for my perfectly ordered world. The vibrant colors of my curated life drained away, leaving behind a monochrome, clinical despair. My thriving career, my impressive network, my beautiful home, my beautiful, charismatic wife. All of it felt suddenly irrelevant, mocking in its continued existence. I walked out of that office a different man. The confident smile was gone. The sharp suit felt like a costume. I was just Mark. A man with a death sentence. The thought of telling Clara, of shattering our shared illusion of control and immortality, was almost as terrifying as the diagnosis itself. I told her that evening, over a silent, untouched dinner. I laid it out, clinically, mimicking the doctor's detached tone, as if discussing a new marketing strategy for a failing product. The prognosis. The limited options. The grim reality. Clara listened, her face a mask of shock, then something colder. Not grief. Not fear for me. Something akin to inconvenience. Annoyance. You mean, it's irreversible? She asked, her voice flat. Her hand, usually expressive and gesturing, was clasped tightly in her lap. I nodded. They're talking about radiation, chemo, palliative care. But it's about managing, not curing. She stood up from the table, pushing her chair back with a scrape that echoed in the sudden silence. She walked to the large glass doors overlooking the city lights, her back to me. I can't handle this, Mark, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, cold as the glass before her. I can't. Our life. Our plans. This isn't what I signed up for. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What are you saying, Clara? She turned, her face unreadable. I'm saying I'm leaving. I can't do this. I need a different life. A future. My world, already crumbling from the diagnosis, shattered into a million pieces. Not grief, but profound, absolute abandonment. Leaving. My voice was a strangled whisper. Now. After this? I need to be true to myself, Mark, she said, her voice acquiring a brittle edge of self-justification. I have my own dreams. My own aspirations. This changes everything for me. She packed quickly, efficiently, over the next 2 days. Her clothes, her toiletries, her favorite objets d'art. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She merely informed me, with a chilling precision, of her lawyer's contact information and the terms of her departure. The life we had built, every meticulously curated detail, was being dismantled with the same cold efficiency she used to organize a charity gala. She got a ticket out of our perfectly curated life. Understood, I responded, the word a quiet, raw admission of defeat. It was the only thing I could say that didn't feel like a pathetic plea. It was an acknowledgement that her loyalty, like so much else in my life, was transactional. The house felt vast, empty, suffocating. Without Clara, it wasn't a home, it was a monument to a life that had ceased to exist. The silence echoed her absence, but also the absence of the man I thought I was. My identity, so intertwined with her charisma and her ability to project our perfect image, felt utterly shattered. In my despair, I reached out. To my carefully cultivated contacts. To the people who filled our social calendar. The friends I had believed were genuinely fond of us, of me. The responses were bewildered. Polite. And, ultimately, distant. "Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry to hear that. Please let me know if there's anything we can do." The invitation stopped. The calls dwindled. The conversations, when they happened, were awkward, filled with uncomfortable silences. My carefully curated social life, without Clara as its vibrant center, simply evaporated. My network, without her charm to grease the wheels of connection, felt like a flimsy spiderweb, easily broken. They were friends of Clara, or friends of our image. Not of Mark, the man facing a terminal illness alone. The pain of broken vows, not just from Clara, but from a wider social circle, was a bitter realization. My identity, it turned out, was less about my accomplishments and more about my presentation, a presentation largely orchestrated by her. I found myself staring at the ceiling for hours, the crushing weight of abandonment almost unbearable. This wasn't just about losing my wife. It was about losing the very scaffolding upon which my entire life had been built. The successful executive, the admired socialite, the man with the perfect life, all were illusions, dependent on a woman who had walked away the moment the facade began to crack. In my darkest hour, when the fear of the illness mingled with the profound ache of loneliness, I sought help. My first meeting with Dr. Evans, a kind-faced therapist, was a blur of raw, unfiltered emotion. I recounted the bleak diagnosis, Clara's cold announcement, the sickening realization that my friends were merely fair-weather acquaintances. "So, your entire life was built on this image," Dr. Evans said, her voice soft, understanding. "And her social capital was essential to maintaining it." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "She was my anchor. And now you feel unmoored," she concluded. "But perhaps, Mark, this is an opportunity to find a new anchor. An internal one. An identity that doesn't rely on external curation, or on another person's presence." The thought was terrifying. And yet, in the depths of my despair, it was also a fragile seed of hope. The perfectly curated life had crumbled. My external anchor had abandoned me. But maybe, just maybe, this shattering was the only way to find out who Mark truly was, stripped bare of all the illusions. And I had a terminal illness, a ticking clock, to figure it out. The terrifying part was, Clara, in her flight, had just cleared the path for me to do exactly that. And in doing so, she had set the stage for her own slow, silent unraveling. Dr. Evans's office became my quiet harbor. In those sessions, I began to articulate the tangled web of my life, the meticulously crafted facade, the unspoken reliance on Clara, the devastating diagnosis, and the subsequent abandonment. She didn't offer platitudes, only incisive questions that forced me to confront the uncomfortable truths. It was painful, peeling back the layers of self-deception, but also liberating. I was beginning to understand that my emotional dependency on Clara had been profound, a silent partner in the creation of my outwardly successful, but inwardly fragile, identity. She hadn't just been my anchor, she had been the entire ship. And now, adrift in the open sea of my illness, I was forced to learn how to swim. As I grappled with my own shattered reality, news of Clara began to filter back to me through the periphery of my dwindling social connections, or sometimes, from the knowing glances and hushed tones of Dr. Evans. It was a strange, detached observation, like watching a play unfold from the back row. Clara, I learned, initially tried to maintain her elite social standing. She still sent out invitations to her perfectly curated, small group luncheons, her exclusive cocktail parties. My former assistant, a kind woman named Brenda who had stayed in touch, mentioned seeing her at a few high-profile charity galas, still impeccably dressed, still with that practiced, brilliant smile. She was, I surmised, attempting to project an image of resilience, of someone who had made a difficult, but necessary, choice. But the elite circles we had moved in were like a finely tuned ecosystem, and Clara, without me as her anchor, was an invasive species, suddenly out of place. It began subtly. A missed invitation here, a polite but firm no there. Whispers, I imagined, would follow her like a shadow. Have you heard about Mark? Oh, so tragic. And Clara just left. The unspoken judgment would permeate the air. Our social currency had been tied directly to my success and her role as the devoted, charming wife by my side. When I was no longer the successful executive with the terminal illness, but simply the man with the terminal illness, her position became untenable. The community's rejection, at first quiet and insidious, gradually became more overt. Brenda told me about a mutual acquaintance, a powerful socialite who had always adored Clara, now making a point of looking away at public events. Invitations to exclusive private clubs, where I was a long-standing member and Clara an honorary guest, simply stopped arriving for her. I heard that the guest list for the prestigious annual Black Tie Gala, an event Clara had spearheaded for years, had been revised, and her name was conspicuously absent. It wasn't a public outcry, it was a silent, almost invisible, social ostracization. These were people who valued appearances above all else, and Clara's abandonment of a terminally ill spouse was a breach of a very fundamental, unspoken social contract. It looked bad. And in that world, looking bad was a death sentence. She hosted her New Year's Eve party, Brenda confided, and it was sparse. Barely half the usual crowd. And those who did come left early. Brenda sounded genuinely sorry, not for Clara, but for the awkwardness of it all. It was a quiet, public testament to Clara's diminishing social power. Her fledgling business ventures, which had always struck me as more of a hobby fueled by my network than serious enterprises, began to wither. Clara had dabbled in bespoke event planning for high-net-worth individuals, leveraging our social contacts for initial clients. She'd also launched a small, online lifestyle consulting platform, using her curated image as its primary marketing tool. But without my active network, without the steady stream of introductions I facilitated, and without the prestige of being Mark Carter's wife, her client base dried up. I remembered countless evenings spent making discreet calls, sending introductory emails to influential people in my orbit on her behalf. Clara's doing something exciting in event management, you should really connect with her, I'd say, smoothing the path. My professional connections, the ones I had built over 2 decades of hard work, had been the fertile ground upon which her ventures had been planted. Now, without my consistent cultivation, that ground became barren. Brenda once mentioned that Clara's lifestyle consulting website, which had always looked professional if somewhat generic, seemed to have stalled. New content stopped appearing. The success stories she once highlighted, often featuring people from our mutual social sphere, vanished. I didn't check myself, I didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. A few weeks later, Brenda casually mentioned she'd seen a "for sale" sign on the commercial space Clara had rented for her event planning business downtown. It was a small, insignificant detail in my world, but for Clara, I knew, it was a huge blow. She had built her identity, and her ventures, on borrowed capital, not just financial, but social and professional. She had relied on me to be the anchor, not just for her personal life, but for her public persona and ambitions. She had seen her departure as an escape from a burden. What she hadn't seen was that she was severing the very ties that connected her to the world she so desperately valued. Her social standing, her professional aspirations, they were the leaves on a vine whose roots were intertwined with mine. And when she cut the vine, thinking she was escaping, she had condemned herself to a slow, solitary wilting. It was a strange sort of cosmic justice. I was facing the ultimate physical decline, my body betraying me, but in the process, I was finding a strength, an internal anchor, I never knew I possessed. Clara, on the other hand, was facing a social and professional decline, her external scaffolding collapsing, forcing her into a lonely, financially precarious future. She had left to save herself, but in doing so, had condemned herself to a different kind of terminal illness, one of isolation and insignificance in the very world that had defined her. My focus, in Dr. Evans's office and beyond, was on building my new anchor. I was finding solace in quiet moments, in genuine connections with the few people who remained, untainted by the superficiality of my past life. Brenda, for instance, became an unexpected source of quiet support, and I found myself valuing her simple kindness more than any grand social event. I was learning to live, truly live, even as my time was drawing short. And in that process, the unraveling of Clara's perfectly curated postmark life was a distant, almost academic observation, a painful but necessary validation of lessons learned too late. My sessions with Dr. Evans became the bedrock of my week. In that quiet room, amidst the comfortable silence and her gentle guidance, I continued the arduous work of excavating my true self. I learned that the fear of not being enough on my own, of lacking an inherent charisma, had driven me to construct a life so reliant on Clara's social magnetism. Her abandonment, while shattering, had also been an unwilling catalyst. It stripped away the veneer, revealing the raw, unvarnished mark. And surprisingly, terrifyingly, I found that underneath it all, there was something there. Something resilient. I started to appreciate the small, genuine connections I had unknowingly cultivated. Brenda, my former assistant, was a steadfast presence. She'd check in, bring me groceries, listen without judgment. She wasn't part of my curated elite circle, she was simply kind. I found more solace in her quiet companionship than in all the glittering galas Clara and I had ever hosted. I reconnected with my older sister, who had always gently tried to pull me away from the superficiality of my corporate life. Our conversations were honest, heartfelt, filled with a love that required no performance. The physical decline was inevitable. The headaches grew more persistent, the fatigue more profound. There were days when just getting out of bed felt like an insurmountable task. But strangely, as my body weakened, my mind seemed to sharpen. The terminal illness, once a terrifying, all-consuming darkness, began to recede, replaced by a quiet acceptance. This was my reality. And within that reality, I was finding a profound sense of peace. I spent my days differently. I read books I'd always meant to read. I listened to classical music, truly listened. I sat on my porch swing, watching the changing light, feeling the sun on my skin, appreciating the simple, fleeting beauty of it all. I meditated, learned to quiet the frantic chatter of my mind, and found moments of profound stillness. I was learning to be present, to find joy in the small, uncurated moments. I was building my internal anchor, a deep, unwavering connection to my own spirit, independent of any external validation or social standing. News of Clara still reached me, but it came less frequently, and with diminishing impact. Her social exile became complete. The whispers had solidified into outright avoidance. Her name, once a beacon of social aspiration, now carried a heavy weight of judgment. Brenda told me that Clara had tried to launch another venture, wellness coaching, business, but it too had quickly fizzled out. No one from our old network was sending clients her way. Her social media presence, once so vibrant and aspirational, grew quiet, then dormant. She had sold the commercial space, I knew. And then, months later, I heard through a distant acquaintance that she had put the grand house in the hills, the backdrop to our perfectly curated life, on the market. It had sat there for months, too expensive, too ostentatious for anyone but someone with a similar, if less honest, ambition. Eventually, it sold for less than market value, a quiet desperation sale. I heard she had moved to a smaller, anonymous apartment, far from the elite circles she had once so vigorously cultivated. I imagined her there, alone, stripped of the external adornments she had so desperately relied upon. No more lavish parties. No more endless social invitations. No more Mark as her anchor, her source of access, her justification for her carefully constructed identity. She had sought a ticket out of my illness, a way to preserve her future, but in doing so, she had effectively severed herself from the very source of her perceived success and social standing. She had traded a difficult present for a bleak, lonely future. There was no gloating in my heart, only a quiet, profound understanding of the consequences of her transactional nature. Perhaps, in her quiet moments, she was beginning to understand it too. As my own time drew closer, a strange calm settled over me. My life, which had begun with such a fragile, externally dependent identity, was ending with a newfound, internal strength. I had faced the ultimate abandonment, not just by a spouse, but by the very illusion of the life I thought I had. And I had survived it, not by fighting, but by accepting, by letting go of what was external and embracing what was true within. I wrote letters. To Brenda, thanking her for her genuine kindness. To my sister, for her unwavering love. I spent my final days looking out at the quiet beauty of my garden, feeling the gentle breeze, listening to the birdsong. The story of Mark, the successful marketing executive, the socialite, the man with the perfect life, had ended long ago. But the story of Mark, the man who found himself amidst the ruins of his curated existence, who built a new anchor within, who found peace in acceptance, that story felt complete. Clara had abandoned me, claiming she couldn't handle it. She emptied our shared world and moved on to protect her own perceived future. I responded calmly, understood. When she realized what she had truly done, what she had forfeited by cutting ties with the very source of her borrowed light, it was already too late. She had sacrificed a genuine connection for a facade, and when the facade crumbled, she was left with nothing but the echo of her own choices. My terminal diagnosis had been her ticket out. But her abandonment became the catalyst for my profound self-discovery, and for her own quiet, devastating reckoning. I, the abandoned anchor, had ultimately found my own way home.